Chapter 44. After work in the evening, Leonardo returned to his apartment and immediately noticed a pair of high heels by the door, feeling a bit puzzled. As he entered the main bedroom, he saw a woman sitting at the vanity, and his expression softened. However, when he approached, his expression turned colder. "You're going out?" As soon as Leonardo entered, Eloise sensed his presence. She didn't look up when he spoke, continuing to apply lipstick slowly to the mirror, then pursed her lips, admiring herself before saying, "Victoria said it's been a while since we got together, so she's arranged a gathering tonight." Finished speaking, she looked up at him, her lips curving into a smile as she winked at Leonardo. "What? Don't want me to go?" Leonardo looked at the woman in front of him, his gaze suddenly deepening. Eloise was clearly well-dressed, her makeup more intense than usual, more seductive and sexy than she was at work. Her slightly upturned eyeliner was incredibly alluring, matched with her fiery red lips, which seemed capable of capturing one's soul with just a smile. "Where to?" Leonardo asked, his eyes flickering with a dark light, his cool demeanor and indifferent tone making it seem like a casual inquiry. "It's a small bar. Victoria said it's quite interesting," Eloise said nonchalantly, standing up from the chair and turning to head towards the changing room. However, before Eloise could take 2 steps, Leonardo grabbed her wrist and pulled her towards him. Immediately, a strong arm encircled her waist, and a cool softness touched her neck. Eloise was slightly taken aback, then her smile deepened. "So clingy." The man greedily inhaled the scent of her perfume, his nose tracing the curve of her scapula upward, finally resting beside her ear as he whispered, "When will you be back?" Leonardo lowered his eyes, concealing the near madness that surged within him. He had to be an obedient and understanding person, only then could he gain her affection. "Want to come with me?" The man tightened his grip on Eloise, his eyes dark with conflicting emotions, but after a moment, he whispered in her ear, "No need, just remember to come back early." Leonardo knew that pushing too far would only be off-putting. Moderation was key, whether in business or in love. The desire for possession and control, if shown too much, could scare someone away. Therefore, he had to control his desires, carefully manage his emotions, and not frighten her. Eloise was surprised he declined. Though it wasn't impossible to take him, the gathering was a girls' night, and bringing a younger boyfriend might make Victoria jealous. She'd probably accuse Eloise of being heartless. Upon this thought, Eloise softened towards the man's obedient and considerate demeanor. In the next moment, she turned and cupped his face, kissing him lightly on the lips. With her thumb, she smoothed the lipstick that had transferred to his lips, adding a sensual touch to his refined features. "Don't worry, wait for me at home, and I'll reward you when I return." Eloise turned and headed towards the dressing room, leaving Leonardo staring at her departing figure, his gaze turning deeper. As they were going to a bar, Eloise dressed more daringly than usual, a tight off-white tank dress paired with a khaki plaid suit jacket, casual yet feminine, showcasing her curvaceous figure perfectly. Leonardo's face darkened as he watched Eloise leave the apartment, though he didn't voice his disapproval, merely pretending to be magnanimous. Although her outfit wasn't overly revealing, everything about it seemed irresistibly attractive, making him want to hide her away. Eloise met Victoria at an outdoor Western restaurant. After dinner, they headed to the interesting bar Victoria mentioned, only to find it was a nightclub, leaving Eloise feeling slightly deceived. In the booth, Eloise sipped her non-alcoholic drink, observing the already ecstatic Victoria beside her, and couldn't help but vent, "Next time just say you're going to a disco." "If I said that, would you come?" Victoria replied, shrugging and taking a sip of her Long Island iced tea. She had a driver coming for her, so she allowed herself to indulge a bit. Victoria knew Eloise's preferences. She disliked overly noisy environments and preferred quieter bars like soft rock, unlike Victoria, who enjoyed the lively atmosphere. Despite the differences, Victoria had managed to lure Eloise here tonight, unsure if she could do so again in the future. "What are you doing here? It's so boring," Eloise said, the rhythmic music almost deafening, causing her to frown. Surrounded by people enjoying themselves, Eloise couldn't understand their enthusiasm. "Eloise, you're now taken, but what about your single sister here? Think of me," Victoria said seriously, patting her chest dramatically. "I've been single for almost half a year." Eloise hesitated, glancing at Victoria's almost teary expression, feeling somewhat guilty. After all, it was Victoria who initially introduced Leonardo to her. If not for her, Eloise wouldn't be with Leonardo now. To ignore her now would indeed be heartless. "All right, what do you want me to do?" Eloise said, putting down her glass, ready to comply. "Easy, I've called a few handsome guys over. Just sit with me, or it'd be awkward for me alone," Victoria said, offering a somewhat ingratiating smile, her tone cautious. Predictably, Eloise's face darkened at Victoria's words. "Victoria, are you messing with me?" Immediately, Victoria's bravado vanished, her expression stiffening, her gaze evasive. "Oh, I'm just asking you to keep me company." Seeing Victoria's timid smile, Eloise eventually sighed. "Fine, I'll just sit here. I won't get involved in anything else, and I'll leave when it's time." At this, Victoria's face lit up again, clinging to Eloise's arm. "Yes, yes, just keep me company. I'll handle the rest." Eloise rolled her eyes inwardly, suppressing her desire to complain or make sarcastic remarks. Honestly, attending such a matchmaking-like gathering with her current status was inappropriate. If Leonardo found out, he might get upset. However, leaving Victoria alone here wasn't an option, so she had to go along with it. Within 10 minutes, 3 young men arrived near the booth. Victoria immediately waved at them excitedly, drawing attention. Eloise glanced at the newcomers, her lips twitching before returning to her indifferent expression. Victoria sure was something, calling 3 at once, unsure how she'd manage them all. The once quiet booth became lively with the addition of the 3 attractive guys. Eloise quietly moved to a corner, forming a stark contrast with the enthusiastic Victoria, making it clear to the newcomers that Eloise was not to be trifled with. The 3 men weren't easily intimidated, and knowing Victoria's identity as the Yang family's heiress, they didn't fawn over her, but managed to keep her entertained, her laughter unceasing. Seeing Victoria about to drink her 3rd glass, Eloise frowned, reminding her, "Drink less." Victoria snapped back to reality from the charms of the men, glanced at the silent Eloise, then waved the guys to entertain themselves before whispering to Eloise, "How are they? The 3 I picked out, aren't they good-looking?" Not interested, Eloise replied indifferently, not even bothering to look up. "Hey, Eloise, just because you're taken doesn't mean you can't appreciate a handsome man. You weren't like this when you were dating before." Eloise was already dreading Victoria's chatter, so she glanced at the 3 men briefly, her gaze suddenly stopping. Victoria seemed to notice her reaction, chuckling, "What about the middle one? His profile looks a bit like Leonardo, doesn't it?" Eloise narrowed her eyes, then looked at Victoria's eager gaze, scoffing, "Are you blind?" Yes, I'm blind, okay?" Victoria replied, unperturbed by the retort, nudging Eloise playfully. "So, how's it going with you two? Aren't you already done with him?" At this, Eloise recalled the events of last night in the living room, her throat tightening as she asked casually, "How long is normal for a first time?" "Seriously, you really..." Victoria almost cursed out loud, stopping only when Eloise gave her a cold look. "Didn't mean that." Apologizing to the men across from them, Victoria turned back, surprised, lowering her voice. "Have you actually engaged with him?" Eloise felt a pang of regret, but saw no point in hiding it now, so she calmly said, "No, just used my hands." "Oh." Victoria's disappointment was evident, her tone less enthusiastic. "Using your hands, 3 to 4 minutes is long for a first time, especially when you're excited. It's normal to lose control." Upon hearing this, Eloise reminisced about the grandeur of that night in detail, which immediately changed her mind. She had misunderstood. It seems her little boyfriend is indeed a gifted player. At that moment, the men invited by Victoria seemed to be discussing something as well. One of them, speaking with great emotion, couldn't help but raise his voice. Man, I really lost out. As soon as the afternoon trading session started, the stock price just kept falling. I lost a lot of money and decided to cut my losses by selling everything. Who would have thought that right before closing? It started to rise sharply. Upon hearing this, Eloise raised an eyebrow slightly and couldn't resist chiming in. It's obvious that this is a common trick by the big investors. They use narrow fluctuations to get you small investors to sell. Later, when trading volume increases, they drive up the stock price. It's normal to lose out. It's better to let go early if you can't compete with their tactics in the stock market. With these words, the atmosphere suddenly turned cold, as if time had suddenly stopped. After half a minute, Victoria was the first to regain her senses and spoke up to warm the atmosphere. Hey, my friend here is more involved in this field, so it's become a professional habit. Please excuse her. However, those young men seemed to only react then, their eyes suddenly shining brightly. They then enthusiastically began to seek advice, leaving Victoria, the main organizer, behind. But Eloise isn't one to be overly helpful. She answered a few questions before losing patience and then remained silent. Hey, Sky, aren't you an actor? Why do you care about the stock market? A boy suddenly spoke up amid the commotion. Sky is an actor? That's a coincidence. My sister runs an entertainment company. Victoria said with enthusiasm, winking at Eloise. Which company is Sky signed with? Upperclass Entertainment. Upperclass Entertainment. Eloise had heard of them. Their reputation in the industry wasn't great, as they seemed to particularly like exploiting newcomers. As someone in the business, Eloise knew more about certain things than those outside the industry. Thinking of this, Eloise casually glanced at the young man, but unexpectedly met his gaze. Those sparkling eyes were all too familiar to her. Eloise couldn't help but smile, then indifferently withdrew her gaze, not placing his attempt at cordiality in her eyes. I didn't expect Victoria's friend to be a big boss. Which entertainment company is it? Maybe Sky knows about it. Oh, it's all my fault for being muddle-headed. I haven't introduced my friend to you yet. Victoria said, a proud smile on her face, pointing to Eloise beside her. She's Eloise, the Cheen from QS Corporation. As soon as the words fell, the three young men immediately became excited. Only Sky in the middle appeared slightly calmer. He had guessed beforehand that Victoria would bring Eloise. His agent had also advised him earlier that if he could connect with Eloise, then he wouldn't have to worry about his career in the industry. It was said that Patrick was only promoted after being noticed by Eloise. With Patrick's current status, which small-time celebrity in the lower ranks wouldn't be envious? He was no exception. Since taking his seat, his attention had been focused on Eloise. It was clear she wasn't very interested, so he didn't dare to take the initiative to strike up a conversation. But at this moment, this was a rare opportunity for him. Eloise, I've long admired your name. Sky stood up from the couch, holding a glass of wine as he walked over to Eloise, his intention clearly to toast her. Eloise naturally saw through his little thoughts and spoke with particularly cold indifference. Sorry, I don't drink. Sky's expression stiffened slightly, as if he still wanted to say something, when he saw the woman on the couch slowly take out her phone and unlock the screen in front of him. A picture of a man's sleeping face was clearly displayed in Sky's eyes. His eyes darkened slightly, and Sky immediately understood. He then returned to his seat with a smile, not showing any awkwardness. However, as Sky sat back on the couch, recalling the photo he had just seen, he fell into deep thought. In the apartment before 9 o'clock, the man who had just finished showering stood alone in front of the glass wall, looking at the bustling cityscape, his handsome expression tinged with a hint of chill. Eloise's apartment was spacious, especially cold and empty without her. Having just come out of the bathroom, Leonardo was only wearing a pair of pajama pants, the smooth lines of his upper body exposed to the air, his cool white skin not appearing feminine at all, with a sense of restraint that also exuded a hint of wildness, making people unable to resist. The man's hair was not blow-dried, messily draped over his forehead, with a dark towel hanging around his neck. Looking down, the slightly bulging chest muscles and distinctly marked abdominal muscles were particularly eye-catching, and the beautiful V-line at the waist, each part like a masterpiece carefully crafted by an artist. He was clearly trained, his muscle lines clearer than when he was changing in the dressing room during a business trip. If he was considered immature then, he was now like a ripe fruit, waiting for his lover's plucking. However, this lover of his was currently enjoying herself elsewhere, completely forgetting about him. The man's eyes darkened, a hint of aggression spreading across his brow. The house was too quiet, quiet to the point of irritation. She had promised to come back early, liar. Was she too engrossed in having fun with her friends to remember the time? Or did she meet someone new she fancied at that new bar? Recalling the scene of their first encounter, the woman was so vibrant and confident, a glass of angel's kiss, simply and boldly declaring her intentions. He hadn't taken it to heart at the time, but looking back now, he found that moment's Eloise stunningly gorgeous. He was afraid that Eloise might offer a new, angel's kiss to someone else, just like they had met. It has to be said, he regretted it, regretted letting her out so easily. If he had known this would happen, he should have given her a fierce bite on the neck, marking her body with his own imprint. That way, those annoying flies outside wouldn't be so clueless as to come near her. Thinking of this, the man's eyes grew thickened with darkness, watching the vehicles coming and going outside the glass wall, narrowing his beautiful eyes slightly. After a moment, as if something suddenly occurred to him, Leonardo took out his phone from his pajama pants, removing the towel around his neck. In the next second, the man lifted his hand, pushing the wet hair falling over his forehead back, revealing a clean forehead and those dashing eyebrows. His beautiful eyes slightly glowed, in the darkness appearing even more like a predator waiting to strike, ready to lure its prey into its embrace. On the other side, sitting on the couch, Eloise suddenly received a text message. She opened the chat box without expression, but her eyes suddenly brightened, her eyebrows unconsciously raising slightly. Leonardo, the night view is beautiful. Leonardo, image. Eloise clicked on the photo sent by the other party, and the illuminated night view outside the glass wall immediately filled the entire screen. However, Eloise immediately noticed the reflection on the glass wall. Sunken collarbones, slightly bulging chest muscles, well-defined abdominal muscles, and V-line, each exuding a strong sense of male hormones. Her gaze paused, Eloise's eyes on the photo grew long, and after a while, she chuckled softly, directly putting the phone back into her pocket, and then quickly stood up from the couch. Her little boyfriend was timid and afraid of the dark, and it was pitiful to leave him at home alone. She had to go back and take care of him. Sitting beside her, Victoria saw Eloise's movements and asked in confusion, "You're leaving?" Eloise nodded, her tone calm, with a hint of excitement hidden within. "Yes, it's getting late." "It's not even 10 o'clock yet?" "There's someone at home throwing a little tantrum. I need to go back and console him." With that, Eloise revealed the first smile of the night, just a slight curve of her lips, which instantly made Sky in the middle lose his focus. "The bill is on me. Feel free to enjoy yourselves. I'm taking off." Eloise's actions were swift and decisive, so much so that everyone sitting in the booth stared blankly at her departing back, unable to react for a while. What did Eloise mean by her words just now? Someone suddenly asked. Victoria withdrew her gaze, sighed softly, and then explained, "Probably her little boyfriend at home is urging her to return." "Miss has a boyfriend?" Sky asked, his voice tinged with surprise and faint disappointment. Yes. Victoria's nature was lively, and at this moment, she didn't notice Sky's unusual behavior. She smiled at him and said, "And I've noticed her boyfriend's profile looks a bit like yours." Upon hearing this, Sky froze, then smiled brightly, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Ms. Yang, why don't we create a group? We can also arrange to meet up and play together in the future," Sky said in a consultative tone, but already took out his phone from his pocket, leaving no room for refusal. The remaining two naturally had no objections and took out their phones to create a group face-to-face. However, after Victoria joined the group, Sky spoke up naturally again, "Why don't we also add Eloise?" After all, we've just played together. Victoria pondered for a few seconds, then nodded after a moment, raising her voice. All right. Chapter 45. Inside the quiet elevator lobby, Eloise's phone began to buzz incessantly as text messages poured in. Glancing down, she realized Victoria had added her to a new group chat. It seemed they had all dispersed, and the three guys were now chattering away in the group, trying to maintain the buzz from the nightclub. Eloise frowned and immediately called Victoria to demand an explanation. Sitting in her car, Victoria was initially caught off guard. After Eloise's stern questioning, she quickly composed herself and meekly explained, "They just wanted to create a group for future meetups." "Why did you include me?" "Someone suggested it, and since we were together tonight, I thought excluding you would seem like we're ganging up on you," Victoria replied, forcing a laugh. "Besides, isn't that what friends are for?" Eloise couldn't help but massage her aching temples. She felt speechless for a moment, but realized she hadn't clearly communicated her situation to Victoria. Sighing in frustration, she said, "Victoria, I'm serious this time." Since meeting Leonardo, she had found herself saying this a lot under various circumstances. Eloise knew she used to be quite the social butterfly, with numerous relationships under her belt. While not indiscriminate, she didn't shy away from further interactions and friendships if someone caught her eye. In the past, she wouldn't have minded Victoria creating a group, especially with attractive young men involved. Even if she was in a relationship, it was just a group chat. As long as she didn't cross any lines, she was fine with it. Victoria understood her nature and occasionally shared contact details of attractive guys with her. But perhaps because of this, Victoria assumed this relationship, like her previous ones, was just for fun. After all, their meeting place was a bar, a common setting for casual encounters. Seeking momentary passion and excitement, only to part ways when the thrill faded, was all too typical. Hearing Eloise's words over the phone, Victoria fell silent, her expression turning serious. After a moment, she spoke again, her tone less casual than usual. "Eloise, are you sure it's him?" In the quiet elevator lobby, Victoria's voice echoed in the confined space, reverberating in Eloise's heart, as if questioning her soul. "Yes." At Eloise's confirmation, Victoria's eyes widened slightly, and she let out a soft chuckle, her tone returning to its playful self. "Wow, never thought I'd see the day Eloise would settle down," she teased. Eloise smirked, the coldness in her eyes dissipating. "Jealous?" "If you are, just find someone yourself," Eloise said, recalling a distant memory, her eyes flickering with unreadable emotion. "Victoria, find someone who treats you well and seriously date them." Eloise vividly remembered getting a call from Victoria 4 years ago while she was studying in the US. Victoria was gasping for breath, sobbing uncontrollably and repeatedly screaming, "He's gone, he doesn't want me," and other such phrases, refusing to listen to any consolation. It was the middle of the night in China, and the sound of rain was audible in the background. Victoria hadn't mentioned who he was, but Eloise knew it was her high school sweetheart. The woman on the other end of the line paused, her breathing halting as if time had stopped. A few seconds later, light-hearted laughter emerged, tinged with a touch of bitterness. "Hey, don't go all saintly on me once you've reformed. I'm not done playing yet." Eloise didn't push further, knowing that some experiences are beyond the understanding of outsiders, and too much advice would only sound hollow. "Don't worry, I'll dissolve the group chat soon, so your little boyfriend won't get jealous and blame me," Victoria exclaimed, suddenly excited. "Oh, and since you're off the market, can you pass those cute guys in your messages to me? You won't be using them anyway." As Eloise entered the room, she immediately spotted Leonardo sitting on the couch. He was dressed conservatively in a loose t-shirt, hiding his charms, and his damp hair was now dry, gently falling over his forehead, contrasting sharply with the wild image from the photo earlier. Raising an eyebrow, Eloise's eyes sparkled with interest as she walked barefoot towards the couch. "You're back." Leonardo stood up as she approached, his eyes burning with anticipation, his typically cool demeanor unable to hide his subtle joy. However, things didn't unfold as he expected. He had imagined Eloise returning to hug and kiss him, just as she had left. After all, he had patiently waited at home for hours without disturbing her. But to his surprise, Eloise walked right past him to the glass wall, completely ignoring him. Standing there, Leonardo's gentle demeanor vanished, his hands clenched at his sides, his gaze turning dark as he watched Eloise's back. In the next moment, the gloomy aura around him dissipated abruptly, and Eloise turned just then, leaning against the glass wall with a light laugh. "Why aren't you coming over?" Under the warm yellow light, the man in the loose clothes seemed even thinner, his lowered head making him look like a neglected puppy, endearing and pitiful. "Did you have fun?" Leonardo asked, his voice slightly melancholic. Eloise didn't answer, instead beckoning him with a finger, saying, "Come here first." Leonardo bit his lip, suppressing the emotions swirling within, then stepped towards Eloise. Just as he was a pace away, she suddenly moved, grabbing his wrist. Leonardo was caught off guard and offered no resistance as she pinned him against the glass wall. The atmosphere turned intimate, the air thick with tension. Before Leonardo could react, a soft hand slid under his shirt. Still cold from being outside, her fingers felt cool against his warm skin, causing a shiver to run through Leonardo. "What are you doing?" Feeling a sense of danger, Leonardo instinctively grabbed her hand, though he didn't pull it out. Eloise smirked, her face, with its exquisite makeup, appearing even more alluring and captivating under the light. She leaned closer, her lips lightly brushing against his prominent Adam's apple, making him shudder and turn his head away, his cheeks flushed. A faint red lip print appeared on his pale skin, visually striking. "Is the night view nice?" Eloise murmured, her lips trailing down his neck to his collarbone, stopping at the small mole nestled there. Leonardo's throat moved as he swallowed, his breath disrupted by her teasing, his body tense as if resisting yet yielding. His face remained flushed, spreading even further to his ears, looking adorably embarrassed. His grip on her wrist loosened without him realizing it, tacitly allowing her antics. He hadn't intended to refuse, but her aggressive advances prompted his defensive stance, wanting just a moment to catch his breath. Eloise patiently waited for him to release her wrist, then gently bit the mole, her hand tracing upwards along the muscle lines. This time, he didn't resist, his eyelashes fluttering as a voice roughened by emotion escaped him. "It's okay." "Why the sudden dress up?" Eloise chuckled, making Leonardo's face redden further. She had noticed it, the reflection in the photo. Leonardo, despite his intentions, felt a pang of embarrassment when caught. "It's cold." "Intentional?" Eloise asked, her actions unabated. Leonardo's well-toned body was evidence of his training, rigid with tension or perhaps nervousness, making his muscles stand out more. He knew exactly what she meant by intentional. Yes, he had been intentional, but so what? At least she had come back in less than half an hour since his message. Clearly, she had rushed back upon seeing his text. Suddenly, Eloise's fingertip brushed against something sensitive, causing Leonardo to grunt, then hurriedly pulled her hand out of his shirt, his eyes moist with a hint of redness, clearly flustered. But to Eloise, his reaction was amusing, her smile deepening with mischief. "Eloise." "Shuh." Her finger pressed against his lips, their bodies already intimately close. Leonardo's eyes lowered as he watched Eloise's lips draw near, speaking in a seductive tone. "Don't you want a reward?" Her lips lightly brushed against his, causing Leonardo's gaze to darken. After a few seconds, he couldn't resist her allure and tried to kiss her, but Eloise dodged at the last moment, pushing against his chest with her hand, her eyebrows arched lazily. "Want it?" He remained silent. She knew this was her tactic, using temptation to make him confess his shameful thoughts. His lips pressed together, his gaze deepening, brighter than the stars in the night sky. Under normal circumstances, anyone would have surrendered immediately, unable to resist such looks for long. But Eloise wasn't ordinary. She preferred seeing his usually cold demeanor break into embarrassment and anger. Leonardo often projected an aloof and noble aura, his intimidating good looks and expressionless face making him seem unapproachable, which only piqued her curiosity further. From the moment they met, she had been imagining how he would look when moved by passion. Since the liquor he concocted is so strong, his heart must be fiery as well. The more noble and pure she appears, the stronger her desire to defile him. "Good kids are honest," Eloise said, her fingertip gently stroking his lips, her flickering gaze in her eyes making it hard for Leonardo to resist. As it turns out, whatever Eloise wants, she gets. The next moment, Leonardo wrapped one arm around the slender waist of the woman, his other hand moving her hand away from his mouth, and in one swift motion, the situation between them instantly reversed. Eloise was unexpectedly pressed against the glass wall, tightly held in the man's embrace. The hand that had been teasing was pinned above her head with force, her entire body descending with a strong predatory intent. "I want." As soon as the words left his mouth, the man accurately captured the lips he had been longing for. In the vast living room, the atmosphere was on the verge of igniting. Like dry wood and sparks, once touched, a raging flame erupted, consuming both their rationality. At some point, the suit jacket draped over Eloise fell to the ground, her graceful figure directly exposed to the air. With scorching hands wandering along the curves of her delicate body, as if desperately seeking something to soothe his yearning soul, he wanted his body to remember every inch of her. In a daze, the original straps fell onto her arms, and Eloise's feet gradually left the ground, her entire body lifted and held by Leonardo in his arms. Her slender legs wrapped around his waist, as if taking his soul, forcing him to offer his body and mind, not daring to betray in the slightest. After an unknown period, their lips parted, and a thread was drawn, and the man, because of this stimulation, was somewhat overwhelmed, burying his head in the woman's shoulder, smelling her perfume, kissing her skin, to alleviate the restlessness within his heart. Eloise naturally sensed his discomfort, her hands holding the man's head, her fingers intertwined in his soft hair, stroking it repeatedly as if trying to soothe him. "So good," Eloise said, gently kissing his cool hair and then whispering in his ear, "To my room, The man did not respond, his hot breath continuously sprayed onto the skin of her neck, a bit itchy, a bit hot, causing her to sweat slightly. After a moment, Leonardo finally moved, his steps steady and swift towards the bedroom. 10 minutes later, Leonardo sat on Eloise's bed, slightly lowering his head, as if to calm his previous impulse or to savor the lingering warmth. Eloise was taking a shower in the bathroom, the sound of running water seeping through the door and into the man's ears, making him somewhat restless. After entering the room, it was he who first lost control, but Eloise was also a ruthless person, not hesitating at all to push him away, saying she was going to take a shower, leaving him completely aside. Leonardo had no choice. He dared not defy her wishes, so he could only obediently sit by the bed, waiting for someone's favor. At that moment, a text message notification sounded in the room. Eloise's phone was brought to him from the living room and placed on the bedside table. Leonardo's gaze unconsciously glanced at the phone screen, and a few seconds later, his eyes darkened, stepping to the bedside table, picking up Eloise's phone, and unlocking it with the password. The password was something he had seen before. Eloise never hid anything from him, so naturally, he remembered Eloise's lock screen password. Opening Eloise's text messages, what was seen was a friend request prompt. "Hello Eloise, I'm Sky." A simple introduction, but it made Leonardo's brow furrow, a sense of crisis emerging spontaneously, a man's instinct. The other's Instagram permissions were wide open, and the man didn't hesitate to click in, flipping through his photos, his expression somewhat scrutinizing, as if saying, "Let me see what kind of monster you are." The first Instagram post was 10 minutes ago, with 4 people in the photo, 3 men and 1 woman, the scene looking like a bar or nightclub. This was an ordinary photo, but the man's eyes suddenly saw something. His expression instantly cooled, his fingers quickly zooming in on the photo, staring intently at the corner where a calf and half of a clothes hem were captured. Undoubtedly, judging from the pattern of the hem, it was the outfit Eloise wore tonight, and the calf was also too familiar. He had touched it not long ago. At this moment, Leonardo's expression was so dark it was frightening. Staring at the exposed calf for a long time, his jawline tense, an icy aura emanating from his entire body, permeating the room. A few seconds later, the man's fingers moved again, continuing to flip through other photos on Instagram, many selfies instantly coming into view, looking quite attractive. After an unknown period, a photo of a man in a gym suddenly appeared, bare-chested, revealing the hint of six-pack abs and biceps on his arms, clearly used to charm girls. In his mind, the line called reason completely snapped. Leonardo exited his Instagram, the murderous intent in his brows almost palpable. Just as he was about to block the person named Sky, Leonardo seemed to think of something, his actions suddenly stopping, a flash of dark light in his eyes, and a few seconds later, he instead pressed the accept button. As expected, after the friend request was approved, the other party sent 2 messages first. Sky, Eloise, very happy to meet you. Sky, emoji. With a bang, the man, with a sullen face, put the phone back on the bedside table, unable to help cursing in his heart. Duck? Duck your head. At that moment, just finished drying her hair, Eloise came out of the bathroom in a nightgown. However, when she just walked to the bed, the originally quiet man suddenly moved, grabbing the woman's wrist, pressing her directly onto the bed. The black hair instantly scattered on the bed, and the black straps also slid down from the snow-white shoulders, the scenery in front of her chest vaguely visible, slightly undulating with her breathing, causing the man's eyes to heat up. The impulse that had just cooled down welling up again. So passionate? Eloise raised her eyebrows, not showing any intention to resist, but instead lifted her hand to wrap around the man's neck, her eyes full of charm. Leonardo pursed his lips, wanting to question her about that man, but the words reached his mouth and were swallowed back. He knew that people like Eloise hated unreasonable behavior the most. In fact, that photo didn't mean anything, it was all just his overthinking, but he couldn't help it, he couldn't control his dark thoughts, his possessiveness. Though he was prepared, knowing that with Eloise's charm, there would be many flies swarming around, he didn't expect that he had only been with her for a short while before catching one. Can't hold back? Eloise said, gently holding Leonardo's face, her eyes slightly narrowed, as if seducing, as if challenging. Leonardo's eyes slightly froze, a storm surging in his heart, just about to lower his body, when the text message notification sounded again, and Leonardo's action suddenly stopped, his mind instantly awake. The expression stiffened, Leonardo sat back down by the bed, speaking indifferently, "You should reply to the message first." Eloise lay on the bed a bit confused, not expecting her little boyfriend to break halfway. What's so important about replying to a message? When it's such a crucial moment, what message is there to reply to? Feeling a bit speechless since Leonardo said so, she also sat up from the bed, taking back her phone to see which unperceptive person was interrupting her good time. Half a minute later, Eloise looked at the chat box that suddenly appeared in her text message list, slightly stunned, then seemed to react all at once, a light laugh escaping from her lips. On the other side, hearing the laughter, Leonardo's expression suddenly cooled down, the coldness in his eyes flashing, his hand on his thigh gradually clenching into a fist. Is she laughing? What message made her so happy? In the extreme anger, the man did not notice the woman's approach, and when he smelled a shampoo fragrance, his shoulders suddenly sank, the familiar softness instantly pressed against his back. The unexpected benefit made Leonardo slightly startled, the chaotic thoughts in his mind disappearing in an instant, his whole body tense, and even his breathing was subconsciously lightened. The woman hugged the man's neck from behind, holding the phone in front of Leonardo's eyes, her lips pressed against his earlobe, asking teasingly, "You added this for me?" Below the screen was the chat box of the person named Sky, who, not waiting for Eloise's reply, sent another ambiguous sentence, "Had a great time tonight." "No," Leonardo said, his tone extremely cold, with a hint of grievance if one listened closely. Heh, the woman's laughter sounded in his ear, making his earlobe itchy, an evil thought surging from the depths of his heart. "This has nothing to do with me. If my sister wants to catch a fish, I only acted as a background board throughout, not even speaking a few words. I don't know this person." The man's eyes flickered, and then he said, "He knows you and calls you Eloise." "Lots of people call me Eloise. Who does he think he is?" Eloise said, right in front of him, blacklisting the person named Sky, then gently bit his earlobe, coaxing softly, "I only know a little boyfriend named Leonardo." For some reason, the slight turmoil in his heart suddenly dissipated. She always has this kind of magic, able to manipulate his emotions at will. "My good little boyfriend, don't be jealous, Or do you not want the reward? Good, help me get the thing from the bedside drawer." Hearing this, Leonardo's expression still had a hint of gloom, but there was no coldness in his brows. Not wanting to compromise so quickly, but his body was the first to obey his emotions, obediently listening to her words, walking to the bedside table. The drawer was pulled open, a box of pink condoms was blatantly in his sight, causing him to suddenly freeze in place. Eloise naturally noticed Leonardo's reaction, lying sideways on the bed, her lips curving slightly, asking back, "How about it, do you like it?" Leonardo froze for more than 10 seconds, the next words like they were squeezed out from between his teeth. "Why is it strawberry flavored?" The woman didn't care at all about how charming she was at the moment, her beautiful eyes curved into crescent moons, saying, "Such a milky little boyfriend, of course, it's more suitable for strawberry flavor." On the other side, standing by the bedside table, the man heard this, his hand holding the pink box paused, his face slowly turning as black as a pot. For the entire night, Leonardo proved with his strength that Eloise's perception was completely wrong. In the deep of the night, the man panted, pressing against the woman's ear, his voice hoarse with desire, asking back in her ear, "Do you like the strawberry flavor?" Chapter 46. The next morning, Eloise stood before the bathroom mirror, her expression darkened by the harsh marks on her body. Leonardo was still asleep in bed, his face relaxed and satisfied after a night of intense activity, looking as innocent as an angel. However, recalling the events of the previous night, she could no longer associate him with the term angel. When Eloise woke up, she barely had the strength to walk into the bathroom, leaning against the sink to gather her thoughts. Her black nightgown hung loosely on her, one strap slipping down to reveal her fair skin, which should have looked porcelain-like but was now dotted with deep red marks, indicative of her boyfriend's passionate vigor the night before. Eloise understood, to some extent, that a man's first time could be urgent and somewhat rough, but she hadn't expected him to ignore her pleas and continue with an almost possessive intensity. As she leaned forward, supporting herself on the sink with one hand, she frowned at her reflection and gently touched the marks, ready to curse when the bathroom door suddenly swung open. Before Eloise could react, her waist was gripped tightly, and the next moment, Leonardo's warm body pressed against hers, enveloping her entirely. A heavy feeling settled on her shoulder as his hot breath brushed against her neck, deepening the creases on her forehead. "What are you thinking?" Leonardo murmured, his nose lightly grazing her earlobe, his lips close to her ear, his voice slightly raspy from just waking up yet incredibly alluring. Eloise remained silent, but Leonardo seemed to sense her mood and tightened his embrace around her. Looking up, Leonardo saw her somber expression in the mirror and, surprisingly, felt no panic. Instead, he gently kissed her cheek and asked tentatively, "Are you angry?" The bathroom was filled with the sound of his voice. Leonardo had suddenly become bolder, as if he had gained some advantage, reveling in it, or perhaps hit by some unexpected joy that made him want to leap with excitement. She was his, from the beginning, his. Leonardo had thought that their encounter would end with his flustered confusion and her poised mastery, but reality showered him with a gift that filled him with wild joy. Desire surged upon discovering the truth, entwining around his heart and reason, compelling him to further possess her, to mark her inside and out with his essence, now and in the future. His eyes swirled with tumultuous emotions, a mix of ecstatic and intensely obsessive feelings. Eloise in the mirror didn't see his gaze, nor did she notice his ever-slight upward curve of his lips. She only saw Leonardo's dark head bobbing on her shoulder, which only added to her irritation. She tried to pull his head up by grabbing his hair, but he didn't budge, just as he had been the night before, passionately and relentlessly, regardless of the hair she had pulled out. After a few minutes, Eloise gave up her struggle. But her hand was suddenly caught by Leonardo, and before she could react, a series of kisses landed on her fingertips, tickling her. Annoying, Eloise snapped, yanking her hand back. Leonardo paused, a shadow passing through his eyes, and when he spoke next, his tone was tinged with subtle sadness and regret. "You dislike me now?" Eloise was taken aback. In the mirror, her head slowly lifted, revealing a slightly sad expression. His eyes were dim, his face seemingly emotionless, yet clearly conveying his distress and sorrow, causing Eloise's heart to constrict as if her conscience was pricking her. "Get up first." Eloise finally relented after a few seconds, her voice softer. She was physically exhausted and emotionally troubled. It wasn't right to blame Leonardo, after all. She had initiated it last night. She couldn't just discard him after a less-than-stellar experience. "Eloise, I'm sorry," Leonardo murmured, not letting go. Seeing his marks on her pale skin in the mirror, a perverse sense of satisfaction arose, yet his expression remained contrite and self-reproaching, genuinely apologetic for his actions the previous night. "You know, it was my first time. I couldn't help it," Leonardo said, gentle kisses landing on her shoulder as he adjusted her slip strap, greedily taking in every inch of her. "I promise I won't do that again." By this point, the anger in Eloise's heart had turned into pity, with all her defenses seeming superficial against his tactics and machinations. "Just go out, I need to get ready for work," Eloise said, rubbing his head. Leonardo knew when to stop, and he obediently released her, softly responding with a before turning to leave. However, just as he was about to step out, he paused, as if remembering something, and turned back, looking innocent. "I forgot something." Eloise glanced at him, puzzled. Moments later, Leonardo slowly pulled a piece of fabric from his pajama pocket and handed it to her, speaking naturally. "Honey, you left this." Looking down at the black underwear in his hand, Eloise suddenly felt a chill, too much of a breeze. Her face darkened, a strong urge to curse rising. Noticing Eloise's embarrassment, a smirk flashed through Leonardo's eyes, which Eloise caught. Was her boyfriend teasing her now? Eloise arched an eyebrow, then with a smile, she took back her underwear, her actions graceful, not at all flustered as Leonardo had imagined. In front of him, Eloise slowly put on the underwear, the sight vague behind her nightgown, teasing yet discreetly covered by the hem. A crisp sound of the elastic hitting her skin snapped Leonardo back to reality. "Thanks," Eloise said, smiling alluringly at Leonardo, her disheveled hair and loose strap, along with the marks on her skin, exuded a kind of broken beauty. Leonardo's gaze darkened, but before he could speak, the bathroom door slammed shut. The cold-hearted woman hid all the beautiful sights, leaving Leonardo standing there, the image of her dressing vividly replaying in his mind. The erotic actions, when done by her, were not vulgar, but rather elegant, truly hard for him to resist, making him unable to get enough. In the morning, the flag quietly rose. At 2 p.m, in the president's office, Eloise set down her pen and stretched her sore arm. The intense battle from the previous night still had her feeling the effects. Fortunately, Leonardo had some sense and didn't leave any marks on her neck. Most of the marks were below, which could be covered by a shirt. Otherwise, if her colleagues saw them, what would be left of her reputation? Likely branded as lascivious. Eloise, Colwyn game has been acquired, Luke said gravely beside her desk, making Eloise pause her stretching. Her brows furrowed, her tone chilly. What do you mean? Luke pursed his lips, hesitating for a moment before speaking. The acquisition was signed this morning. The news hasn't been officially released yet. This is first-hand information we got through our contacts. The atmosphere in the office grew heavy. Luke glanced at Eloise's expression, feeling a bit apprehensive. He knew that recently, Eloise had proposed acquiring this gaming company in a board meeting at the headquarters. QS Corporation was involved in many industries and was expanding, but it also had its flaws. QS Corporation was now in its third generation under Eloise, which could be considered old-fashioned compared to some enterprises. But precisely because of this, over time, certain weaknesses had emerged. There was no denying that QS Corporation lacked insight into the young consumer market. Eloise was the one who first proposed acquiring Colwyn Game, a venture QS Corporation had never explored before. This idea was born after Eloise conducted some research. However, the old-fashioned executives within the company were resistant to change and immediately expressed strong disapproval, arguing that the risk was too high and the return on investment would be a long-term process, not worth the time and money. Although the proposal was rejected by the board, Eloise persisted with the idea. She continued to analyze the pros and cons and tried to persuade the conservative members of the board. But unexpectedly, her efforts were thwarted when someone else beat her to the acquisition. Colwyn Game was a newly established gaming company known for its highly acclaimed game Fortify. Although not extremely popular, it had a loyal fan base with strong user retention, which was one of the reasons Eloise was interested in Colwyn Game. However, 6 months ago, Colwyn Game had already faced a debt crisis and was now on its last legs. Eloise had planned to acquire it before it went bankrupt, either through the company or personally if necessary. But she was outmaneuvered midway. "Have you found out which company did it?" Eloise asked, rubbing her aching brow, feeling a tinge of regret. "It's a newly established investment company, but it seems to be a shell." "The identity of the anonymous backer is unknown," Luke replied, intrigued by this sudden competitor. "I see. You can leave now," Eloise said, her voice laced with fatigue. Concerned about Eloise's well-being, Luke asked, "Is something wrong with your health, Eloise?" Eloise's expression froze slightly, but quickly returned to normal, becoming more guarded. "No, just didn't sleep well last night. Should I cancel your afternoon appointment at Align Corporation?" Luke inquired. The afternoon involved a quarterly progress report for a joint project, with Eloise set to represent QS Corporation. After some thought, Eloise replied, "No, you and Ronnie will go instead." Luke was momentarily stunned, but soon replied, "Understood." Before 3:30 p.m., Leonardo glanced at the time on his phone and then dialed a number on the office phone. Within 3 seconds, the line connected, and Leonardo asked coldly, "Have the representatives from QS Corporation arrived?" "Yes, they just got on the elevator." Hearing this, Leonardo's expression softened slightly, his usually stern features warming up. "Good, I understand." He then hung up, quickly stood up from his chair, and was about to leave when he remembered something. A slight frown crossed his brow as he took out 2 newly bought strawberry candies from his drawer, gripping them in his palm before heading towards the elevator. Standing at the CEO's private elevator, Leonardo watched the ascending numbers with a growing sense of anticipation. He hadn't expected that just a few hours apart, he would miss her so much. Once you've tasted something sweet, it becomes addictive and harder to control oneself. He had thought about calling her at noon to inquire about her health, but considering they would meet later at the office, he restrained himself. The strawberry candies were bought during lunch break at a convenience store near the company. Since last night, he had developed a liking for this flavor, the mix of sour and sweet tantalizing, much like the blend of pain and pleasure he felt during their encounter last night. Thinking about this, Leonardo felt a surge of heat, his palm holding the candies growing warm, his eyes gleaming with excitement, like a predator about to meet its prey. With a ding, the elevator numbers stopped changing. Leonardo's lips curled into a gentle smile, an expression rare in the workplace. However, mindful of the professional setting, he kept his smile subdued, though his eyes were soft as if they could melt. As the elevator doors opened, Leonardo was about to speak when his expression froze. His tender gaze hadn't had a chance to recede, and his smile hung awkwardly, looking rather strange at first glance. The person inside the elevator seemed equally surprised, and their eyes met, creating an awkward atmosphere. Leonardo, the assistant? Luke was the first to regain composure, questioning uncertainly. In an instant, all emotions vanished from Leonardo's face, his smile disappearing, his eyes turning stormy as if the weather had suddenly turned gloomy. Ronnie, watching this transformation, was at a loss whether to be amazed or annoyed. "Where's Eloise?" Leonardo asked, directing his question at Luke. However, Ronnie misunderstood and explained for him, "Eloise isn't feeling well today, so I'm here to represent her at the meeting." His tone was unusually close. The moment the words left his mouth, Leonardo's eyes darkened with fury, his face turning colder. His fists clenched at his sides, the plastic wrapper of the candies digging into his skin, the slight pain far overshadowed by his burning anger. Meanwhile, Ronnie, standing in the elevator, felt a chill under Leonardo's icy gaze, puzzled and uneasy. "Is there something wrong, Leonardo, the assistant?" Leonardo snapped back to reality, his earlier gloom disappearing as he stepped aside, his voice indifferent. "Mr. Liu, you misunderstood. The meeting is about to start. Please follow me to the conference room." Ronnie, unconcerned, stepped out of the elevator, but as he passed Leonardo, a strange sense of familiarity struck him. He paused, studied Leonardo's profile, then seemed to realize something, a glint of understanding in his eyes. When he first met Leonardo, the assistant, in Eloise's office, something felt off, but he couldn't pinpoint what. Later, seeing Eloise's phone wallpaper by chance, it seemed familiar, but he didn't dwell on it. Now, everything seemed clear. "You and Eloise seem close?" Ronnie probed, his tone cautious, which irked Leonardo. "What do you think, Mr. Liu?" Leonardo retorted provocatively, ignoring the question. The air sizzled with tension as Luke, standing nearby, shivered. Their eyes darted between the two, eventually settling on Leonardo, puzzled. Leonardo's persona didn't match what he thought. This wasn't the poor little soul he had envisioned. His aura rivaled Eloise's. "Young and hot-headed, huh?" "Not very modest, though," Ronnie remarked, his eyes narrowing. This young man was more complex than he had imagined. "Eloise appreciates my spirit. What about you, Mr. Liu?" Leonardo's lips curled, devoid of warmth, making him even more intimidating. Luke kept his head low, puzzled. Was it just his impression, or was Leonardo different in Eloise's presence? "Being spirited is fine. Thank you." They exchanged veiled remarks, and as the time approached, they ended the cryptic conversation. Leonardo, still standing, watched Ronnie's departing figure, his face darker by the second. He glared at the man as if he were dead, a feeling of dread creeping in. Moments later, Leonardo followed, tossing the almost melted strawberry candies into the trash without a glance. Chapter 47. The results presentation meeting was actually quite inconsequential for Eloise. After all, the summary report had already been sent to her email, and the meeting was mostly just a formality. For someone like Eloise, who was already familiar with all the processes and operations, it wasn't particularly useful. However, Ronnie was different. As the new deputy general manager, he was still in the exploratory phase regarding some of the projects underway in the company. This meeting was an opportunity for him to quickly grasp the progress of the collaborative projects between the two companies. Although Eloise was aware that Leonardo had some reservations about Ronnie, she knew that personal feelings had to be set aside when it came to business. Moreover, Eloise was not an emotional person, and she was genuinely tired. It was a win-win situation, so why not take advantage of it? Besides, they could see each other again in the evening, so missing out on a moment or two wasn't a big deal. With this thought in mind, Eloise comfortably sat in her office, leisurely reviewing the upcoming documents. Meanwhile, Leonardo in the conference room was not as pleased. It was as if he had been eagerly preparing to unwrap a gift, only to find a pile of excrement when he opened it. The sense of disappointment was so stark that it took him more than 20 minutes to recover. The meeting lasted an hour, and Leonardo had already memorized all the content and procedures. Originally, in order to spend more time with Eloise in the conference room, he had added more content relating to future development prospects, investigations and studies that extended the originally 40-minute meeting by 20 minutes. But now, he wished he could turn back time to 3 days ago and delete all those extra content. As the representative of QS Corporation, Ronnie naturally received the same level of etiquette as Eloise. Jim sat in the middle, with Jim and Leonardo facing each other, their gazes occasionally colliding, and each encounter sparked lightning. Secretly, Leonardo scrutinized Ronnie from head to toe. As the man chosen by Eloise's parents, Ronnie naturally had some capital. Not only was he handsome, but his temperament was also excellent, with a mature and stable demeanor in his speech and behavior. However, acknowledging the merits of a rival in love was out of the question. Frankly, Leonardo believed that his appearance was far superior. Their heights may have looked similar, but he was clearly 2 centimeters taller. As for physique, Leonardo didn't think he was inferior either. Most importantly, he was younger. Whether it was physical strength or energy, he was undoubtedly far superior to the 30-year-old, mature man in front of him. Leonardo couldn't understand why Eloise's parents would fancy someone like this. Throughout the hour-long meeting, Ronnie couldn't help but feel Leonardo's gaze. Although it wasn't exactly open, it was quite unconcealed. The cold, disdainful, and contemptuous looks were something he had never experienced before, making him uneasy and at the same time, somewhat amused and helpless. Clearly, Eloise's young boyfriend must have known about his interest in Eloise. But his feelings for Eloise were limited to liking and appreciation, and this sentiment became restrained after knowing she had someone she liked, not warranting such vigilance. The provocation at the elevator entrance was nothing more than a manifestation of a man's desire to compete, but he didn't expect Eloise's boyfriend to take it seriously. At the end of the meeting, Leonardo almost instinctively stood up from his chair, his physiological aversion making every moment spent with Ronnie a torment. However, reason restrained his impulse to rush out the door. After all, they were in the company and his identity was the assistant to the president of Align Corporation. Even if he was furious, he wouldn't act on impulse. The spacious conference room gradually became empty as the staff who participated in the meeting dispersed. Only 4 people were left behind, exchanging polite greetings that were overdue. "Jim, please take care of me in the future," Ronnie said with a polite and courteous smile. "You're too modest, Mr. Liu. With your talent, it should be mutual learning," Jim said, shaking hands with Ronnie briefly, and then casually exchanged a few more pleasantries before watching Ronnie and Luke leave. The conference room suddenly became very quiet. It wasn't until Ronnie disappeared around the corner that Jim spoke again. "Are you not even going to put on a facade?" Jim said this without any reproach in his expression, looking at the man beside him whose face was cold and found it somewhat amusing. "You think too much," Leonardo said, his voice exceptionally icy, like the biting wind of a harsh winter, making one shiver. What facade could he put on in front of a love rival? Not resorting to direct physical action was already giving face. "You're indeed still young." Jim said this and backed away a couple of steps, leaning against the conference table. He changed from his usual gentle and refined demeanor to one that exuded an air of nonchalance, quite inconsistent with his usual image. "Adults don't act as excessively cautious as you do. After all, this is also a freshness in love, don't you think?" Jim said, a hint of interest flashing in his eyes. Leonardo frowned slightly, his tone even colder when he spoke again. "I don't need this kind of freshness. Those who need rivals to constantly stimulate a sense of crisis will never end up with love. It's just pure possessiveness and competitiveness." Jim shrugged, not feeling uncomfortable at all because of his attitude. Raising an eyebrow, he spoke again with a hint of probing. "You should know that Ronnie was arranged into QS Corporation by Eloise's parents, right?" As soon as these words were spoken, the air in the room froze. Leonardo, who was standing still, trembled slightly, and his expression darkened even more, the chill emanating from his entire body making even Jim want to shiver. Leonardo didn't say anything, but his reaction was enough to explain the situation. "Her mother is quite fond of him, which is why she arranged for him to be the deputy general manager by Eloise's side," Jim said, his gaze fixed on Leonardo's face, wanting to see how he would react. To be honest, in his daily work, Leonardo's aura of life was too dim, with a perpetually expressionless face and cold eyes like an emotionless robot. Such a Leonardo rarely made mistakes in his work, but he was just too dull. Even in the face of his usual teasing, he remained unmoved. The only time there was some emotional fluctuation was when Eloise was mentioned. "So," Leonardo said, not turning around, but just from his back, one could guess how terrifying his expression must be at this moment. "What are you trying to express?" "Eloise's parents are not old-fashioned people. If Eloise insists on being with you, they won't oppose it too much," Jim said, pausing for a moment, his expression gradually becoming more serious, but matching social status, although it is despised by many in this era, is not without reason. "Do you think with your current status, how long can you persist with Eloise?" The hands by his side had clenched into fists unknowingly. The man's expression tightened, his eyes like the dark sea at night, seemingly calm but hiding undercurrents that no one could imagine. This was a kind reminder, although it sounded cruel, it was the truth. Despite our repeated cries of true love above all, in reality, the so-called true love doesn't seem as great as people imagine. And those who shout the loudest often end up surrendering to the so-called interests and betraying their previous promises first. After an unknown period, the man's clenched fist suddenly relaxed, and the next moment, a cold voice sounded in the quiet conference room. "I want to resign." Upon hearing this, Jim was slightly stunned, then said, "Am I being too harsh on you? If it's because of this, there's no need to do so. Acting impulsively is not a good thing." "It's not impulsive," Leonardo said, turning to meet Jim's gaze. His heavy gaze made Jim feel a sudden shock, and after a while, he suddenly realized, chuckled, and said, "Have you thought it through?" Jim wasn't stupid. When he initially heard Leonardo say the word resign, he instinctively thought he was acting out of impulse, but upon reflection, he immediately understood. With Leonardo's character, he would never act impulsively. This could be seen from his work style. He would never fight an unprepared battle. Clearly, Leonardo's resignation was not a mere statement, but the result of careful consideration. "Yes." "When will you leave?" "I can't find a replacement for you that quickly." "In half a month." Jim raised his lips, feeling somewhat regretful. Indeed, this kid has been plotting for a long time. "Are you going to tell Eloise?" "No need." As soon as the words fell, the man standing in place finally moved and left the conference room. After work that evening, Eloise returned to the apartment and smelled a delicious aroma as soon as she entered the door. Everything was the same as usual. After dining at the table, Eloise went to her room to take a shower, while Leonardo cleaned up in the kitchen. This seemed no different from usual, but Eloise always felt something was off. It wasn't until she finished showering and came out of the room that Eloise suddenly realized where this strange feeling came from. She should have been the representative of a line corporation this afternoon, and letting Ronnie attend in her place was a last-minute decision. According to Leonardo's character, he would likely have sent her a message asking what was going on the moment he saw Ronnie. Yet, it was already evening, and the man hadn't mentioned anything about this, as if he had completely forgotten about it. Eloise stood in the corridor, the kitchen and dining room already cleaned up, and Leonardo should be showering in the bathroom. Her gaze fell on the closed door, and after pondering for a few seconds, Eloise walked towards the guest room. The door wasn't locked, and Eloise entered gracefully, looking around, her beautiful eyebrows arching slightly. Since Leonardo moved in, the guest room had undergone a transformation with no trace of its past. Although it didn't look particularly cozy, it was much better than the hotel-style layout. Perhaps this was another way the man expressed his little emotions, not wanting to have any hint of someone else's presence, subtly reclaiming the entire room in a veiled manner. The sound of water flowing came from the bathroom, and Eloise sat on the man's bed, quietly waiting for him to appear. After an unknown amount of time, the sound of water suddenly stopped, and within 5 minutes, the bathroom door was abruptly opened. The man walked out of the bathroom, wiping his hair, surrounded by a familiar bath scent, along with white mist enveloping him, adding a few more seductive vibes. He seemed to be caught off guard by Eloise's sudden appearance in his room, freezing on the spot, even stopping his hand that was wiping his hair. "Finished showering?" Eloise said, a slight smile playing on her lips, her aggressive gaze sweeping across his naked body, her eyes filled with undisguised appreciation, making Leonardo feel a bit shy. Undeniable, Leonardo's physique was indeed impressive, as evidenced by the way a mere reflection in a window had once stirred her desires. Now, facing the man's vibrant body directly, the visual impact only intensified. Though she had seen and touched him last night, her consciousness had been clouded then, and the sensation had shot from the base of her spine to the depths of her soul, leaving her too consumed to pay attention to his physique. The man's skin was paler than the average male, and the traces of last night's battle adorned it, as if declaring the woman's retaliation. Particularly the few dark red marks on his pectoral muscles, coupled with the occasional droplet sliding down his chest, made him even more alluring. "What brings you here?" Leonardo asked, moving closer to sit down next to Eloise. His hair still damp, Leonardo refrained from embracing her, lest the water should fall on her. "Not happy to see me?" Eloise asked, standing up as if to leave. "Then I'll be on my way." But before she could take a step, the man pulled her back into his embrace, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, leaving no room for resistance. "You know that's not what I meant," Leonardo murmured, pressing his lips gently against her shoulder, his tone tinged with a mix of helplessness and indulgence. Abruptly seated on his lap, Eloise relaxed after a moment, willingly accepting the human cushion, ignoring his puppy-like habit of constant kisses and licks. "Have you seen Ronnie?" Eloise asked, getting straight to the point. As soon as the words left her mouth, she felt the arm around her waist tighten, followed by a playful nip on her shoulder, a sign of her boyfriend's annoyance. Asking the obvious, came his muffled voice, which oddly made Eloise want to smile. "I thought you didn't care," she teased. Beneath the wet bangs, the man's hidden eyes glinted with an unfathomable light, his expression seemingly aggrieved, yet not entirely so. "I'm not unreasonable," Leonardo said, his tone light but tinged with a hint of heartache. "He's your vice president. It's only right for him to attend in your place. The meeting would be more beneficial to him than to you, especially since you're not well. Why would I fuss over such a foolish matter?" His obedience was a bit unsettling, and Eloise felt a pang of guilt. "What do you mean he's my vice president?" Eloise asked, turning to meet his gaze. "He's part of the company, but you're mine." The man's pupils contracted slightly, his eyes darkening as if a tempest surged within, yet upon closer inspection, no trace could be found. His gaze fixed on her lips, his Adam's apple bobbed as his voice unexpectedly grew. "I wanted to give you candy, but you didn't come." Eloise was puzzled. What candy? In the next moment, the man reached out and retrieved a pink candy from the bedside table, the same type he had bought at the convenience store. Eloise looked at the candy in his hand, her brows lifting slightly, and teasingly asked, "Strawberry flavor?" The man hummed an affirmation, his serious expression showing no hint of anything amiss. Seconds later, light laughter filled the room, and the man's indifferent expression faltered, his eyelashes fluttering as his ears flashed red. The sound of plastic candy wrapper crinkling filled the air as Eloise unwrapped the candy and placed it in her mouth, then remarked a few moments later, It's a bit sour." Leonardo was about to speak when suddenly, his lips met with a soft warmth, and a warm, moist candy was pushed into his mouth by the woman's tongue, intertwining for a moment before she withdrew without a trace. Holding the candy in his mouth, Leonardo's gaze darkened. "It's sweet," Leonardo murmured, lowering his head to lean against her, his voice tempting. "If you don't like it, how about last night's strawberry flavor instead?" The atmosphere instantly became incredibly sultry, and Eloise's eyes flickered, her fingertips sliding up from the man's firm abdominal muscles to pinch gently at a spot, igniting the room. "Feed it to me, and I'll eat it." 3 days later, a set of paparazzi photos suddenly topped the X search rankings, featuring an obscure 18-line actor named Sky, and the other being the heiress of QS Corporation, Eloise. Eloise was well known in upper-class circles, but the general public had limited knowledge of her. Some small gossips had dug into her past, but most netizens dismissed the dramatic stories as mere entertainment. However, this time was different. The sudden appearance of the hot search left QS Corporation and Eloise herself baffled. It was evident that the search was paid for, yet it remained at the top, soaring in popularity. An 18-line rookie and a typical female CEO, how could this not excite the masses? The first post under the hot search was a set of photos released by a marketing account, totaling 3 in number. The first 2 were profile shots, one showing the two walking hand in hand, the other being Sky's selfie posted on X the night before, with the last being a text-based, detailed overview of all Sky's acting experiences since his debut. The marketing account's post was straightforward, centered around the core theme of Sky's rumored romance exposed. His girlfriend turns out to be the heiress of QS Corporation Group. Perhaps having prepared in advance, the reasoning was exceptionally clear, analyzing the situation with 2 unrelated photos in a convincing manner, leaving netizens impressed and inclined to believe the relationship between Sky and Eloise was extraordinary. However, many netizens did not agree with the marketing account's description of the relationship. Instead of seeing it as a romance exposure, the comments were flooded with suggestions that it was a sugar mum exposure. This operation did bring a lot of attention to Sky. Almost overnight, his X account, previously with 50,000 followers, 2/3 of which were bots, saw a surge in followers, nearing 2 million, with even more growth as the momentum continued. And because preparations were made in advance, the photos on X were all meticulously edited, many of them showcasing his profile, allowing for further speculation and analysis by netizens. Leonardo found out about the news in the morning. As many employees in the CEO's office loved browsing X, they informed Leonardo of the situation as soon as the hot search appeared. By now, the relationship between Leonardo and Eloise was an open secret within half of the company. And because most of the staff at Align Corporation were not foolish, they knew what should and shouldn't be shared, so they didn't expose the couple's relationship. After learning that Leonardo and Eloise were dating, the CEO's office began to see Leonardo as the legitimate lover and stopped discussing the matter further. Unexpectedly, after the couple parted ways, another lover, Sky, appeared online, causing supporters of Eloise to become instantly enraged. In fact, those unaware of the truth might indeed be misled by the photos, but for those who knew the facts, it was clear that the claims were baseless. The so-called intimate photo was actually of Eloise and Leonardo, having nothing to do with the 18-line actor Sky. This was a blatant attempt to ride on someone's coattails, one that was so outrageous it was infuriating. However, Leonardo's reaction was much calmer than that of his colleagues. Upon seeing the hot search, his gaze merely darkened slightly, with no other reaction, leaving those around him feeling perplexed. Was he not angry about such an obvious attempt to piggyback on their fame? Strangely, the hot search remained at the top until 2 in the afternoon without being removed, still hanging red at the top, while the official account of QS Corporation seemed dormant, ignoring the frantic mentions from netizens, leading many to believe the news was undoubtedly true. Gradually, the online sentiment began to shift. At some point, Patrick's name also appeared on the hot search, with entries alluding to his past romance with Eloise, contrasting sharply with his current favorite, making his situation seem rather desolate. Since his debut, Patrick's career could be described as meteoric, and he had remained at the top, experiencing a seamless rise to fame. Even the drug incident was resolved cleanly. Everyone felt there was someone behind Patrick, yet no one knew who. Today, thanks to Sky, his backer was finally revealed, but he was labeled as the old flame, which was truly a bit tragic. As the online sentiment grew, a figure wearing a mask, sunglasses, and a baseball cap appeared furtively outside Align Corporation. 5 minutes later, in the Align Corporation CEO's office tea room, Leonardo looked at the unexpected visitor, his lips curling into a cold, mocking smile. "Why are you looking for me?" The man closed the door to the tea room before removing his sunglasses and mask, shouting at Leonardo, "Why do you think I'm looking for you? The online rumors have gotten out of hand. Aren't you going to do anything about it?" Leonardo's gaze darkened, unsure of the significance of this man, dubbed Eloise's old flame by the marketing accounts, seeking him out. For a challenge, perhaps? What does it have to do with you? How does that have nothing to do with it? Sky is clearly playing the usual game of lifting others while bringing them down, and I'm a superstar. I can't let him use me to boost his buzz like that. Patrick exclaimed, his face genuinely expressing his anger. "Why don't you call Eloise and have her deal with that shameless guy right away?" At this, Leonardo's smile widened slightly but carried no warmth, his eyes overflowing with arrogance and audacity, and his tone laced with sharp sarcasm. "Just some insignificant trash. Do you really think I'd bother making a call for that? Besides, Eloise will handle him in her own time. I have no need to bring it up in front of her and risk appearing overly sensitive or jealous." Patrick's body tensed a bit more as his nervousness showed on his face. "Aren't you jealous?" Leonardo scoffed. "Do you think I'm as foolish as you?" Running to her in a fit of jealousy the moment someone mentions it. As he spoke, he moved closer to Patrick, placing a hand on his shoulder, his tone now like that of Satan, cold and confident, with an edge of superiority. "It's about strategic retreat, understand?" Patrick swallowed hard, his pupils contracting slightly, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. The tea room fell into a tense silence. "Hand it over." Patrick jolted, stepping back abruptly, his eyes widening as he stammered, "What are you talking about? I don't understand." But before Patrick could react, Leonardo swiftly retrieved the phone from his pocket, spotting the recording interface, raising an eyebrow as expected, and then deleting the audio in front of him. "Trying to outplay me? You're still too green." With that, he ignored Patrick's shock, returned the phone to his pocket, walked past him without a glance, and left the room decisively. However, unbeknownst to Leonardo, after he left, Patrick nervously pulled out another recording device from his other pocket, paused it, and sighed in relief. Chapter 48. In the president's office, Eloise sat in the executive chair, a tablet resting on her right side, the screen displaying the very photos that had been trending on the hot search all day. "How's the matter being handled?" Eloise glanced at the screen before promptly returning her gaze, her expression neutral, as composed as ever. Initially, when she learned of the ambush incident, Eloise felt somewhat surprised, and upon seeing the so-called comparison photos, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Eloise recognized that the alleged in-frame photo was taken of her and Leonardo when they were shopping at the supermarket a couple of days ago. Soon after, it was posted online, becoming a tool for Sky's publicity stunt. Her decision not to clarify immediately was out of mischievousness, as she was not known for having a good temper. Having been exploited to this extent, she felt she had to reciprocate the favor, didn't she? After spending half a day, Eloise had Luke dig up some dirt on Sky. Given his willingness to employ such low tactics, he must have had a history of not being clean, and it was precisely because of this experience that he could latch on so comfortably. As expected, Sky indeed had a history of clinging to fame. He had once actively contacted paparazzi to leak news during a relationship with a female internet celebrity, and later entangled himself in a fabricated scandal with an actress from the same production. However, he was simply too obscure for any attention, and all his attempts at becoming infamous fell flat, hardly causing a ripple. It was hard to tell whether he was clever or foolish, understanding that even after the publicity stunt was clarified, he could simply deny everything. After all, he had never posted anything ambiguous, just a few profile pictures. Later, he could simply blame it on the marketing blogs, earning a wave of attention while escaping unscathed. Wouldn't that be wonderful? However, Sky hadn't anticipated that Eloise was a vengeful person, and his actions were undoubtedly leading him down a path of self-destruction. At 4 in the afternoon, the official Weibo account of QS Corporation finally released a statement, saying nothing but posting a lawyer's letter, claiming to take legal action against all defamatory marketing blogs. The post was quickly propelled to the top of the hot search, while Sky on the other side was closely monitoring the online trends. As soon as he saw QS Corporation's statement, he also released a post, stating that he and Eloise had only met once and, although he admired her, their relationship was definitely not what the netizens were imagining. Suddenly, the excitement online intensified. Many netizens expressed disappointment and regret, having thought it was a real-life, female tycoon falls for me scenario, only to find it was a misunderstanding. However, 20 minutes later, the phrase "Sky's dirt" appeared boldly on the hot search list, turning the cooled-down gossip hot again and stirring up the online community once more. The topic name was too straightforward, and anyone with a bit of sense could guess that Sky had offended someone. As for who he had offended, it was clear to see. Obviously, Sky had hit a brick wall. In an instant, all of Sky's past actions were exposed, including his previous malicious publicity stunts and his affair with a wealthy woman during a relationship. The online sentiment quickly shifted, and Sky fell into a wave of ridicule, with no one associating him with Eloise anymore. There were also those in the comments who were curious about the identity of the other man in the in-frame photo, but these murmurs were quickly drowned out in the tide of criticism against Sky. The marketing blogs spreading rumors have been shut down, and the rest will be followed up by the lawyers, said Luke, his face serious, though inwardly he was also secretly mocking the small star named Sky. He really didn't know what he was thinking, latching onto fame at Eloise's expense. Wasn't that just asking for trouble? If this had happened in the past, Eloise might not have bothered to deal with him, but now it was different. After all, she was already taken, and if the misunderstanding deepened, wouldn't that cause an uproar? Understood, you can go now, said Eloise, handing the tablet back to Luke on her right side. Luke took it and turned to leave the office, leaving Eloise alone in the enclosed space. A few minutes later, the phone on the desk suddenly vibrated. Eloise glanced at the screen and saw that it was a message from Patrick, but after a second, she returned her attention to her work. However, today's Patrick seemed to have taken the wrong medication, lacking the awareness to see when he was not wanted. Not receiving a reply, he began a messaging bombardment, the continuous notifications causing Eloise to feel a headache coming on. Worried that something might actually be wrong, Eloise finally picked up the phone. Upon opening the messages, the first thing she saw was his latest message. Patrick, Eloise. I've sent the evidence to your email. You must take a look. Eloise raised an eyebrow, and at that moment, a pop-up appeared in the lower right corner of her computer screen, a notification of an email received. Her heart filled with doubt, she opened the email from Patrick and found it contained an audio clip. Almost as soon as she clicked it, a familiar voice entered Eloise's ears, causing her to unconsciously frown. Leonardo? The progress bar of the audio clip continued to advance, and the conversation between the two echoed in the quiet office, causing the temperature around to drop suddenly. Just some inconsequential trash. Is it worth me making a special call? The man's words were filled with sarcasm and mockery, completely different from what Eloise remembered. This should have been the voice she was most familiar with, but at this moment, Eloise felt an unprecedented sense of strangeness. A glimmer of obscure light flashed through her eyes, and Eloise's expressionless face made it impossible to discern her current emotions. Patrick, on the other end, received no response and continued to send messages frantically, even calling a few times via voice chat, all of which were hung up by Eloise. Later, finding it too annoying, Eloise typed back a "got it," her ambiguous attitude causing Patrick, who was anxiously holding his phone on the other end, to be instantly confused. What's going on? Doesn't Eloise get angry at all? Not experiencing what he had imagined, Patrick had thought Eloise would be so furious that she would break up with Leonardo immediately. After all, he knew that Eloise hated deception most, and Leonardo's behavior of feigning innocence to gain sympathy would have, in the past, led to her coldly kicking him out without hesitation. But why didn't he feel Eloise's anger? Why was it completely different from what he had imagined? Patrick wanted to ask more, but he also knew that Eloise didn't like others meddling in her affairs. Realizing his behavior today had already crossed the line, he had to suppress his doubts and confusion at this moment. In less than half an hour, the text message alert on the phone sounded again. Eloise initially thought it was another prank by Patrick, but her gaze froze slightly as it swept across the screen. Picking up the phone again, Eloise looked at the message sent by the other party, and her expression became somewhat complicated for a moment. "Leonardo, what do you want to eat for dinner?" After a short while, Eloise replied, "You eat by yourself tonight, I have something to do." As expected, after the message was sent out, the other party quickly asked, "Is something wrong at the company?" Eloise held the phone, squinting her eyes slightly. "Eloise, it's nothing, don't worry." On the other end, the man sitting in the office chair frowned slightly at this seemingly perfunctory remark, his expression turning a bit gloomy. He immediately felt something was odd, along with a vague sense of irritation. Eloise was not like this before. Ever since they were together, she had never hidden anything from him, including post-work plans. Sometimes, even if he didn't ask, she would voluntarily report to him. But what happened today? Her attitude was completely different from before. It just felt off. The man's complexion gradually darkened, his mind racing through countless scenarios, his lips pressed tightly, and he almost couldn't help but want to call her to interrogate, but eventually held back. He was supposed to be gentle and considerate, and directly questioning her was not something he would do. Although he thought this way in his heart, the emotions in the man's eyes were like a fierce storm, raging fiercely. A colleague who had just come out of the restroom accidentally caught sight of Leonardo's expression and was so scared that they hurried back to their seat, not daring to breathe loudly. What's wrong with Assistant Leonardo? Anyone who didn't know better would think his wife had been snatched away. Time ticked by, and Leonardo considered all possible scenarios, even imagining the situation of a secret rendezvous with a male lover. His jawline tightened, and just as he was about to explode, the other party sent another message. "Eloise, I'm going to my parents' house for dinner. It might be a bit late." Almost instantly, the gloom between the man's eyebrows disappeared, shifting from thunder and lightning to clear skies as quickly as a woman's words could change them. Leonardo secretly breathed a sigh of relief, then quickly sent a sticker of a cat nodding. "Leonardo, I'll wait for you at home." Eloise raised an eyebrow upon seeing this. If this was before, after receiving this message, she would definitely sigh in her heart about what an absolutely adorable and obedient little boyfriend this was. She might even soften her heart and leave her parents' home to rush back to the apartment to accompany her little boyfriend. But now it's different. It's as if the man is wearing a new clothes of the emperor, thinking he is dressed in a dignified and elegant manner, while she sees through it at a glance. The location of her parents' home is quite remote, and by the time Eloise arrived, it was already completely dark outside. As soon as she entered the door, Niev was waiting in the living room. Seeing Eloise, she hurried over, and then came a series of inquiries about her well-being. Eloise knew that she didn't come home often, and even less so after having a little boyfriend, so she couldn't help but feel a bit guilty. Therefore, whatever her mother asked, she answered, much more obedient than ever before. At the dinner table, Niev would occasionally chat about daily life to ease the atmosphere, and Eloise occasionally chimed in, maintaining a lukewarm dynamic. After a while, Axel, sitting at the head of the table, suddenly spoke up, "What's going on with X today?" As soon as these words came out, the air instantly chilled. Niev glared at Eloise's father, seemingly blaming him for bringing up such a mood-killing topic during dinner. Eloise put down her chopsticks, elegantly wiped her mouth with a napkin, and replied indifferently, "A small celebrity trying to ride on the coattails of fame. It's already been resolved." "I'm talking about that photo," Axel said, his expression looking quite serious. "Are you in a relationship?" Eloise paused for a few seconds before admitting it openly, not intending to hide it. "What's his name? What does he do?" Perhaps because he was used to being in a position of authority, Axel's tone always carried a strong sense of dominance. Eloise frowned, hesitating for a moment without speaking. Seeing her silence, Axel, reminded of the rumors that had reached his ears, frowned, slapped the table, and said angrily, "Who taught you to do such a thing? You've even set your sights on college students. I've given you so much money. Was it to support a gigolo for you?" Eloise was taken aback, as if suddenly realizing something, and said with a slight smile, "Dad, where did you hear such gossip? Did the old fossils in the board of directors tell you?" Axel was stunned, looking at Eloise's calm and composed expression, realizing he had misunderstood, and his face couldn't help but look a bit embarrassed. This matter was indeed told by those old members of the board of directors. They were always reporting to him, saying that they often saw Eloise going in and out with a young man, and that the boy was fresh out of college. He hadn't believed it at first, but after seeing the photo on X today, he had been momentarily bewitched. Axel coughed twice, then pretended to be serious and said, "So, what's the real situation?" Eloise pondered for a moment, then slowly spoke after a while. "He's a decent person, and I'm serious this time." "Serious?" Niev was immediately intrigued, her eyes shining as she looked at Eloise. "When will you bring him home to meet us? Your parents don't necessarily want you to find a big shot from an influential family in the industry. As long as he's down-to-earth, ambitious, and treats you well." Eloise naturally understood what her mother meant. She didn't mind telling her parents about this, but once she mentioned his name, knowing Niev's temperament, she might show up in front of Leonardo as early as tomorrow. She didn't have any issues, but she wasn't sure if Leonardo was prepared. "I know, I'll bring him back after a while," Eloise said. With that, the expressions of both parents immediately showed a hint of relief. However, not long after, Axel spoke up again. "You've been at the branch office for over 2 years. Come to the headquarters in a couple of days. The position of vice president is open for you. Get a feel for it first, and then I'll be ready to retire." Eloise seemed to have not expected it to be so sudden, her eyes filled with a hint of confusion as she looked at Axel. "What about the branch office? Isn't Ronnie managing it?" Eloise fell silent for a moment, then simply responded with an "Recently, some small shareholders have been trading secretly, but they won't amount to much. You'll need to pay a little attention to that later." "Understood." By the time Eloise returned to the apartment, it was already quite late. After parking the car in the parking space, Eloise sat in the driver's seat and didn't get out of the car for a while. Taking out her phone from her pocket, Eloise opened the recording stored in the phone. The man's arrogant and unrestrained tone immediately echoed in the car. Eloise didn't know why, but she should have been angry. After all, Leonardo had been pretending to be weak in front of her for so long, and to some extent, she had indeed been played around with. But strangely, when she learned the truth, she wasn't as furious as she had imagined. Anger was there, but it was just a fleeting emotion. She couldn't quite describe what she was feeling now. Her thoughts were a bit chaotic, but the restless stirrings deep within her seemed to indicate that she didn't dislike this Leonardo. To be precise, the so-called schemes that Leonardo played in front of her seemed inconsequential to her. She hadn't realized it before, but now thinking about it, in many cases, it was the man who intentionally led her to tease him. "Trying to play mind games with me? You're still a bit green." The recording came to an end, and her little boyfriend's harsh words echoed in Eloise's ears. Suddenly, the woman's lips curved upwards. She took out a pack of cigarettes from the car's storage box and clicked to light one up, the sparks flickering dimly in the dark car. The woman took a drag on the cigarette and exhaled slowly, the entire car gradually becoming filled with smoke. As mentioned earlier, she didn't smoke much on a daily basis, only lighting up when she was extremely agitated or excessively excited, to relieve the turmoil in her heart. As the cigarette burned to the end, Eloise thought she really was completely eaten up by Leonardo. Eloise spent some more time in the underground parking lot before finally standing in front of the apartment door around 9:30. Almost as soon as she entered the door, Eloise was embraced by someone. The man seemed to have been waiting by the door all along, and before she could react, he grabbed her wrist from behind, clasping her waist, leaving her no room to escape. In a very intimate position, the man's head rested on her shoulder, his lips brushing her cheek faintly, and his tone was somewhat aggrieved and dejected. "I waited for you for a long time." Eloise raised an eyebrow, her gaze falling on his arm around her waist. She hadn't noticed before, but this kid's possessiveness was not small. "I was delayed a bit on the way," Eloise said, patting the man's arm around her, hinting for him to let go. However, Leonardo wouldn't be so obedient, continuing to nuzzle his head against the woman's shoulder and said, "Went to find another little boyfriend?" Unseen by the man, a glint of interest flashed in Eloise's eyes. "What if I said yes?" The man's body trembled violently, and the next moment, the eyes hidden under his bangs became extremely dark, but the tone in his voice was filled with deep desolation. "Don't tease me, Eloise, I can't bear it." Eloise didn't respond. Her lips that were about to curve upwards were suppressed again, her face seemingly expressionless, but she secretly complained in her heart, "Is he starting to perform again?